There is a sentence in a translated Japanese operation order, dated the 25th of June, 1944, that says the area of the enemy landing is judged to be either Tinian Harbor or Asuiga Harbor. It is a short sentence, and a reasonable one. And by the time an American translator typed it out in English, the ground it described no longer existed, in any form its author would have known. The island had been graded flat across most of its northern half. 6 runways of 8,500 feet lay where the cane fields had been, with hard stands for 265 heavy bombers and 11 miles of taxiway feeding them. And because the shape of the island reminded the construction battalions of Manhattan, they had surveyed the whole thing as a New York street grid and named the roads after it. Bombs came up from the harbor along the 4-lane highway called Broadway. The ruined town at the southern end, the one the sentence is about, was called the Village. The officer who wrote the sentence was Colonel Kiyochi Ogata. He commanded the 50th Infantry Regiment, which had come down to Tinian in March of that year from a garrison near Mukden, in Manchuria, and it was the only major unit of its division not sitting on Guam. Many of his men were veterans of the Manchurian campaigns. He had 3 infantry battalions of about 880 men each, a mountain artillery battalion of 12 75mm guns, 12 light tanks, an anti-tank platoon of 6 guns, an engineer, signal, supply, and medical companies. By chance, he also had a battalion of the 135th Infantry, about 900 more men, who had been on Tinian for an amphibious exercise when the American fleet arrived in the Marianas and had not been able to get home. Counting the naval troops, he had roughly 9,000 men on an island 3 miles from Saipan, and after the 9th of July, when Saipan fell, nothing could get on or off it. Tinian is a limestone slab with cliffs almost all the way around it, and that is the fact everything else follows from. There is no shelving sand. There is no shallow bay and no broad approach anywhere on the coast. Standing off it from a ship, an officer sees rock at the waterline for mile after mile in places more than 100 feet of it. There are 3 gaps in that cliff line, and no more. Sunharan Harbor on the southwest coast, in front of Tinian Town, Asuiga Bay on the northeast, and 2 slots in the rock at the northwest corner, near Ushi Point, which the American planners lettered as White 1 and White 2. One of those slots was about 60 yards wide. The other was about 160. Both had cliffs, 3 to 10 feet high on their flanks, and no force of any size had ever been landed across anything like them. Ogata looked at that and reached the conclusion any officer of his training would have reached. Tinian Town was the obvious landing. Asuiga was the second. He wrote the 25th of June order naming both. On the 28th, he issued his Defense Force battle plan, and it set out exactly 2 contingencies in the event the enemy lands at Tinian Harbor, and in the event the enemy lands at Asuiga Bay. The northwest slots are not in the document at all. His dispositions followed. He cut the island into 3 defense sectors. His 2nd Battalion took the north, covering Ushi Point and Asuiga. His 3rd took the south, covering the town. To the western sector, which contained the 2 slots in the rock, he assigned 1 company and 1 anti-tank gun squad. His 1st went into reserve dug in near Mount Lasso, and the borrowed men of the 135th Infantry became a mobile counterattack force in the south-central part of the island. Both reserve commanders reported to him in person, which meant that setting both in motion took 2 orders, not 1. His 20 mobile artillery pieces went in with no more than 2 at any one position, sighted so that each could deliver fire on Tinian Town or on Asuiga Bay, but not on both. He did not mass them, and there was a position about a mile south of Mount Lasso, from which massed guns could have covered every possible landing place on the island. He did not use it. The only sign anywhere in his preparations that anyone had considered the northwest slots at all is about 100 anti-boat mines laid on the beach there. There was a 2nd command on Tinian, and it was not talking to the 1st one. Captain Oya's 56th Naval Guard Force, some 1,400 men, plus construction battalions and the ground echelons of 7 aviation squadrons, made up about 4,200 naval personnel, and the Navy held most of the island's fixed coastal artillery. Oya knew he was under Ogata's command. He appears not to have told his own men so. Asked afterward who commanded on Tinian, Japanese sailors answered with Oya's name. The two officers made their preparations apart from each other, and a careful search of the surviving operation orders of both shows a scrupulous refusal to so much as name the other service. A gunner in Ogata's artillery battalion kept a diary. In March, he wrote that the Navy lived in barracks buildings and had liberty every night with liquor to drink while the Army bivouacked in the rain and never got a pass. In June, he wrote that the anti-aircraft guns had spread black smoke where the enemy aircraft were not, and that there had been not one hit out of 1,000 shots. Later that month, he wrote that sailors had stolen the Army's provisions. Here is the thing worth holding on to, because it is the whole question, and it does not have the answer people assume. Nothing above is a blunder. Every step of it follows. A regimental commander with 9,000 men, no air, no fleet, no resupply, and 3 miles of open water between him and 3 American divisions, looked at a limestone island with 3 gaps in its cliffs, decided the enemy would come through the 2 useful ones, and put his weight there. Held up against any manual in any army of the period, that is correct. So, what exactly did he get wrong? Hold that. The Americans were looking at the same island, and they had an extraordinary amount of paper on it. Tinian had been photographed from every angle during the Saipan fighting, and documents captured on Saipan had been translated and worked over for weeks. The official Marine Corps history says that American commanders were almost as familiar with Ogata's strength and defensive preparations as Ogata was. Every scrap of it pointed the same way. The colonel was less ready for a landing on the northwestern beaches than for anything else. None of it settled the argument inside the American command. It started that argument. On 2 nights in the middle of the month, the amphibious reconnaissance battalion and 2 underwater demolition teams went in to find out whether the slots could actually be used. They came off the fast transports. Gilmer and Stringham paddled rubber boats to within 500 yards of the shore, slipped into the water, and swam the rest. Marines measured the beaches and the exits. The demolition men worked the reef in front of them. Turner's standing order was that anything they found, mines included, was under no circumstances to be disturbed, because a cleared beach announces an intention. The first night went wrong. The current took the swimmers so far offline that the party detailed for White 2 came ashore on White 1, and the party detailed for White 1 fetched up on the reef 700 or 800 yards to the north. Half the job got done. The next night they solved it with radar. The Stringham tracked the rubber boats on her scope and passed course corrections to them over a portable set, and the second party walked the beach it had been sent to. What they brought back was the measurement, and the measurement was poor. Never in the war had a force this size been put ashore over beaches this narrow, which is the reason the senior amphibious officer in the United States Navy found himself in agreement with Colonel Ogata. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner had run every major landing in the Central Pacific. When Admiral Hill and General Holland Smith proposed the White Beaches, he vetoed it and told Hill to go and plan a landing at Tinian Town. Hill complied and kept part of his staff working on the other plan anyway. After the swimmers came back, the 2 of them tried again and he would not move. The exchange that survives runs about like this. He tells Smith he is not going to land him on the White Beaches, that he will not land him there. Smith tells him he will land him any place he is told to. He says he is telling him now that it cannot be done, that it is flatly impossible. Smith asks how he knows it is impossible and suggests he is afraid of losing boats. Hill went over Turner's head to Spruance. Spruance liked the plan and did not want to overrule his own amphibious expert, so he called a conference aboard the flagship, where every subordinate commander spoke for the White Beaches, and then he turned to Turner. Turner announced, without any visible difficulty, that he favored the White Beaches too. 6 years later, he wrote to the Marine Corps historian that before the reconnaissance, he had already decided, without announcing it, to accept them, unless the reports came back badly against it. So the plan that went in was one that the American officer responsible for putting men on beaches had spent weeks calling impossible, and that the Japanese officer responsible for stopping them had never written down as a possibility. Both men had done the same arithmetic on the same cliffs. On the morning of the 24th of July, the deception went in first. 7 transports carrying the 2nd and 8th Marines lay 4 miles off Tinian Town, with the battleship Colorado, the light cruiser Cleveland, and 4 destroyers. At 12 minutes past 6, the Calvert's log recorded that the ship had stopped, was lowering landing craft, and was simulating the debarkation of a landing team. Marines went down the cargo nets into the boats and then climbed back up them. 22 boats went into the water empty. At 7:30, they ran for the beach under naval gunfire, took artillery and heavy mortar fire in the boat lanes, pulled back to reform on Admiral Hill's order, and ran in a second time to within 400 yards of the sand before turning away. Shell fragments sprayed some of the boats. Not one man in them was hit. The ships were another matter. Air photography, good as it had been, had missed a battery of 3 6-inch naval guns emplaced in caves behind Sunheron Harbor. Those guns had sat silent through 7 weeks of the heaviest bombardment of the Pacific War to that date, waiting for something worth firing at, and at 20 minutes to 8, a battleship was sitting 3,200 yards off the beach. The battery put 22 shells into the Colorado in 15 minutes. Her officers reckoned about half the rounds aimed at her, found her. The destroyer Norman Scott came in to cover the battleship and took 6 more. The Colorado lost 43 men dead, 10 of them Marines, with about 180 hurt. The Norman Scott lost 19 dead, her captain, Commander Seymour Owens, among them, and 47 hurt. Then the volume of the Japanese fire gave the position away. The ships found it, and every gun and every man in it was destroyed. 62 Americans died in front of Tinian Town that morning, at a landing that was never going to happen. And Colonel Ogata signaled Tokyo that he had repelled more than 100 landing barges. He was not lying and he was not raving. He had been shelled and then approached by 100 small craft. Twice. The craft had turned away. His guns had put a battleship out of the fight and killed a destroyer captain. Every observable fact available to him supported the message he sent. It froze his 3rd Battalion in place around the town, along with elements of the Naval Guard Force, and they stayed there. An infantryman of the 135th wrote in his diary that the fire had been fierce toward Port Tinian until 9, and had then gone quiet after the enemy warships left, and wondered whether the enemy was retreating. Everything so far has come out of one translated sentence in a captured operation order, and the argument that sentence started. Subscribing is what makes a seed that small worth following, and alike is the difference between this reaching people who already came looking and people who never would. 8 miles to the north, the real landing had already started. At about 7:20, 24 amphibious tractors carried the first wave across a line of departure 3,000 yards out. 8 of them held one company of the 24th Marines, going into White One, which meant a column of battalions through a gap 60 yards wide. 16 held 2 companies of the 25th, going abreast into White 2. 2 fighter aircraft flew low along the run-in line, because the smoke had shifted offshore and covered the boat lanes. Scattered rifle and machine gun fire came off the beach, and that was the whole of the resistance. Then the Americans did the thing that Ogata had no way to price, and that Turner had spent a fortnight saying could not be done. They kept feeding men through those 2 slots all day, in column, squads and platoons and companies, rather than battalions abreast. And by dark, they had put 15,600 men ashore, with 4 battalions of artillery, 24 half-tracks carrying 75mm guns, 48 medium tanks, and 15 flame tanks. The beachhead ran 3,000 yards along the shore and a mile inland. It cost 15 dead and 225 hurt. That is the answer to the question from earlier, and it is not the one the story usually gives. Ogata was not wrong about the beaches. He was right about them, and so was Kelly Turner. 60 yards of sand between coral shelves is a terrible place to land a division. Both men knew it, the reconnaissance confirmed it, and the official history states that no force that large had ever attempted such a thing. What Ogata lacked was not judgment and not information. It was a single number that existed in nobody's manual on either side. How many men, guns, and vehicles the United States could push through, a gap in a cliff in one day, if it chose to. Turner guessed low and was argued out of it by his own subordinates. Ogata guessed low and had nobody to argue with, because the officer who might have argued with him was a naval captain who would not mention the army in his own paperwork. He did what his own order said to do. That night, his units came at the beachhead in 3 columns, without waiting for instructions from him, because the bombardment had taken his communications apart, and his standing order of the 28th of June had told them to destroy the enemy on the beaches with one blow. The Marines had strung barbed wire from foxhole to foxhole by passing coils along the line and rolling them out flat, because standing up to string it drew grazing fire. 2 37mm guns firing canister did most of the killing. No gunner on either of them stayed up more than 4 or 5 minutes before being hit, and by daybreak 2 of the 10 original crewmen were still on their feet. In the morning, there were more than 1,000 Japanese dead in front of the lines. 2 things in this story cannot be settled, and it is worth saying which. The first is the signal itself. The Marine Corps operational history states that Ogata sent it, and gives the figure of more than 100 barges. The Marine Corps monograph on the battle, written 7 years earlier by an officer who had gone through the captured documents, does not mention any such message, and says instead that whether the demonstration caused the Japanese to redeploy is unknown. Both are official. Neither cites the other. The second is the colonel. On the night of the 2nd of August, his last position was overrun. 5 Japanese prisoners said afterward that he was among the dead. One lance corporal said he had seen the body draped on the barbed wire, killed by machine gun fire. The Marines never identified it. There is no grave and no confirmation, only 5 men who said so. One last thing. Whether that message to Tokyo counts as an error or as an accurate report of a real fight is a genuine argument, and the comments are where it belongs. On a phone, there is also a hype button under this video, which does more for a topic nobody thinks to search for than any amount of tagging ever will. Tinian was declared secure on the 1st of August, 9 days after the landing. The 4th Marine Division counted 212 dead in a casualty list well past 1,000, and sailed from there to Iwo Jima. The 2nd Division stayed in the Marianas and made its camp on Saipan, having lost 105 men killed out of 760. Japanese dead, counted and buried, came to 5,000, with an unknown number sealed in caves that nobody ever opened. Prisoner counts run from 250 by one report to 400 by another, and nobody has reconciled them. The mop-up ran until the 1st of January, killed a further 542 Japanese, and cost the 1 Marine regiment left behind another 38 dead. Construction battalions of the 6th Brigade started work on the Ushi Point strip before the fighting stopped, and moved enough coral to fill 3 times the volume of Boulder Dam. The first heavy bombers went against the Japanese home islands from Tinian 3 months after the island fell. Over the year that followed, 29,000 sorties flew out of the Marianas, and one of them, on the 6th of August 1945, took off from the runway at the north end of the island and flew 1,500 miles to Hiroshima.